Hi kids. I'm going to try to teach part of a lesson on this Caldecott book study. And you can see here, this is the same posters that I showed you earlier. I've copied them off and put them in this little book form. I'm probably not going to be looking at these yet. I'll teach another video where I'll kind of show how I use these to do the thinking of the book study. But this I wanted to show you with just reading this book, Extra Yarn, by Mark Bennett, illustrated by John Clausen. And I'm going to be reading it and then maybe talking a tiny bit about the things that I mentioned in with the posters over here, but not as in-depthly as I will when I am doing the writing. Okay, but first of all, I wanted to show you this. This is a Caldecott, and this is the medal, okay, that you will see, and these are given out every year. And this was the silver medal that was given out the year that this was published. So I have the book Extra Yarn. Once, on a cold afternoon in a cold little town where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with a yarn of every color. And we can see as we look at this, everything is kind of got a dark look as we look at this. So she went home and knit herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knit a sweater for Mars too. But there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a sweater for Nate and his dog and found herself and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. So one of the things I am noticing is this idea of texture. Let me zoom in on this a bit and we'll see if we can see this. I'm seeing texture with the knitted portion of this. Okay, and that's one of the things we can think about when we are analyzing the art. I'll do it more in depthly. I'm just reading the story right now. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet," shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone, Annabelle. That sweater of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so you won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could, and she did, even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So not that we're working on this, but I am seeing it again and again. We see this word of extra yarn. So it happens over and over and over again. Even though she keeps knitting, there's always more yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mom and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton, and for Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Louise. She made sweaters for everyone except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who would stand in his shorts in the snow up to his knees. "No sweaters for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat. And even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she made sweaters for all the dogs and all the cats and for all the animals too. Soon people thought Annabelle will run out of yarn, but it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even wear sweaters. I love this page. So for mailbox and a house, even a birdhouse, even a little bird. I think that's so sweet. Things began to change in that little town. I see a contrast and contradiction. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the sweaters and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke who was very fond of clothes sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabelle. I think that's the archduke. Little girl, said the archduke, I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I'm willing to offer you $1 million. No, thank you, said Annabelle, who was knitting a sweater for a pickup truck. The archduke's mustache twitched. $2 million, he said. Annabelle shook her head. No, thanks. $10 million, shouted the archduke. Take it or leave it. Leave it, said Annabelle. I won't sell the yarn. And she didn't. So that night, the archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabelle's house, and they stole the box and took it to the archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed over the sea. We see on this page, everything is dark. Back to his castle. The archduke put on his favorite song and sat in his best chair, then took out the box and lifted its lid and looked inside. His mustache quivered. It shivered. It trembled. The archduke hurled the box out of the window and shouted, Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again. But, and we see there's the box, and it looks like it's on a sheet of ice, and there it is. There it is, going back to Annabelle. It turned out she was. And that is the end of that story.